What started as another Middle East crisis quickly turned into one of the most dangerous international conflicts in years. In just days, missiles flew, warplanes struck, a national leader was killed, shipping lanes trembled, and global energy markets went into shock. And the biggest question was no longer whether this conflict would spread. It was how far it would go. This is the story of the 2026 war with Iran, how it started, what really happened, why the consequences reached far beyond the battlefield, and what comes next. For decades, tensions between Iran, the United States, and Israel had been building. At the center of it all were disputes over Iran's nuclear program, its growing missile arsenal, and its network of allied groups across the region. Efforts to resolve these issues through diplomacy repeatedly failed. Warnings were issued and ignored. At the same time, the situation on the ground was getting worse. Regional proxy wars intensified. Direct confrontations between Iran and Israel became more frequent. And by early 2026, the entire region was sitting on a pressure cooker. All these factors were pushing toward a breaking point. And that breaking point came in February 2026. So, what was the motivation? From the U.S. and Israeli perspective, the central concern was Iran's expanding military reach, nuclear capability, ballistic missiles, and regional influence through allied forces. The argument was simple. If Iran crossed certain thresholds, the threat would become much harder to contain later. So, the logic behind the strike was to act first, and act decisively. But this war did not appear out of nowhere. Its roots go back years. The collapse of the nuclear agreement, the return of sanctions, repeated failures in diplomacy, and ongoing proxy conflicts across the region. Each step added pressure. Each crisis raised the stakes. The attack in 2026 was the spark, but the fuel had been building for a long time. Now, let's walk through the conflict from the beginning. Because to really understand this war, you need to see how quickly it moved, from airstrikes to retaliation to a global economic shock. In the days leading up to the attack, military movements intensified across the region. Air defenses were repositioned, aircraft carriers and strike aircraft moved closer. Tensions in the Gulf rose sharply, and once that kind of buildup begins, the region knows something is coming. The opening strike, on February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a massive coordinated attack on Iran, one of the largest airstrike campaigns in modern history. In just the first 12 hours, hundreds of targets were hit, missile systems were destroyed, military infrastructure was crippled. Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was reportedly killed. Officials claimed the strikes were necessary to stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons and to eliminate an imminent threat. But here's where it gets complicated. International observers had not confirmed that Iran was actively building a nuclear weapon, which made the attack highly controversial. The result was immediate shock. Oil markets reacted, Brent and WTI jumped roughly 9% in the first trading day after the attacks. Shipping routes were disrupted, and insurers began withdrawing war risk coverage, making deliveries slower and more expensive. Shipping traffic dropped by 70% within hours after the attack due to warnings and Iranian threats. Iran responded almost immediately. Ballistic missiles and drones were launched across the region. Strikes were reported in Haifa, Tel Aviv, and at U.S. facilities in Bahrain. Civilian casualties were reported in several locations. And just like that, the conflict expanded beyond a single country. Over the next 2 days, the United States intensified its operations. Additional strikes targeted Iran's command systems, missile infrastructure, and naval capabilities. The goal was clear: establish air superiority and cripple Iran's ability to respond. At the same time, the economic impact began to grow. Oil shipments were disrupted, tankers avoided the Gulf, and global supply chains began to feel the pressure. By March 2nd, the conflict had expanded across multiple countries. Iran reportedly launched attacks on U.S. bases throughout the region. Airspace, shipping routes, and military installations were now involved. This was no longer a contained conflict. It had become a regional war. Insurance companies further withdrew coverage, shipping routes were rerouted, and the global system began adjusting to a new level of risk. Shipping costs rose sharply up to 5 times on some routes. Transit times increased by up to 14 days per voyage, and effective global container capacity dropped by around 9% due to longer routes tying up ships. Market shock. By March 9th, the economic impact became impossible to ignore. Oil prices surged, in some cases rising more than 40%. But interestingly, energy stocks didn't rise as much, a sign that markets expected disruption, but not necessarily long-term collapse. Still, the consequences were clear. Higher fuel prices, rising inflation, pressure on transportation and manufacturing worldwide. By mid-March, the conflict reached a new level.